President Trump didn't announce peace. He announced a post on Truth Social, then wrapped it in the trappings of statecraft as if government is just another branding exercise and international security is a ratings stunt. That's the through line of the moment described here. A claimed 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, a start time for maximum headline impact, and a big conditional dangling like a casino disclaimer if it holds. In one sentence, you have the essence of Trump-era foreign policy. Spectacle first, verification later, accountability never. If you listen closely to the reporting and analysis in the transcript, you can hear the structural problem underneath the shiny announcement. Real ceasefires are built on painfully specific terms: monitoring, enforcement, lines of control, withdrawal schedules, communications channels, sanctions triggers, prisoner exchanges, humanitarian corridors, and the mechanisms that make 10 days mean something other than 10 news cycles. What's described instead is a top-down political shove, Trump pressuring leaders, yanking the spotlight toward himself and forcing momentum at a moment when key decision-makers are still mid-process. That might look decisive on television. It can also be destabilizing in real life. There's a reason serious diplomacy is usually boring. The boring parts are the safety rails. And that's where the MAGA performance instinct becomes dangerous. Trump's announcement isn't merely an update. It's an attempt to own the narrative and dictate the frame before the facts are locked down. The transcript indicates the ceasefire was publicized while Israel's leadership was still discussing it, with frustration inside the security cabinet about being outpaced by Trump's post. That's not a trivial inside baseball detail. When a political leader makes an announcement that appears to preempt a sovereign government's internal procedures, it doesn't just bruise egos. It can harden domestic opposition, empower spoilers, and create incentives for anyone, to break the ceasefire simply to prove they can't be ordered around by a foreign politician seeking a victory lap. The GOP's Trump cult has spent years training its audience to mistake dominance for competence. You see that reflex everywhere. He picked up the phone, he forced it through, he made it happen. But forcing things through is not the same as building something that lasts. In fact, when you're dealing with armed actors and fragile political coalitions, the method matters as much as the outcome. A ceasefire pushed by personal pressure and public humiliation can crumble precisely because it was pushed that way. It becomes about face-saving, not de-escalation. It becomes a contest of wills, not a pathway out. The transcript also situates the Lebanon ceasefire in a wider regional chessboard tied explicitly to U.S. Iran dynamics. That linkage may be accurate. Regional conflicts are intertwined, but it raises another red flag. Trump's political brand thrives on one-off deals that promise sweeping transformation without the institutional scaffolding to sustain them. In domestic policy, that yields chaos and reversals. In foreign policy, it can yield escalations, proxy games, and misread signals. Iran, as described here, is watching not just the ceasefire itself, but what it suggests about American seriousness, American trustworthiness, and American intentions. That's not paranoia. That's rational strategy in a region where mixed signals get people killed. If the U.S. looks like it's freelancing policy via a social media post, that doesn't project strength. It projects volatility. Allies don't know what's real. Adversaries don't know what's binding. Everyone starts hedging, arming, and maneuvering. This is where Democrats have to say the quiet part out loud. Trump's diplomacy is often indistinguishable from a leverage play for personal validation. The GOP treats that as swagger. But statecraft isn't a personal relationship seminar, and it isn't a brand activation. It's institutions, continuity, and credibility things Republicans have spent a decade trying to dismantle because they're inconvenient to a politics of grievance and celebrity. When Trump turns geopolitics into an ego-driven pageant, he's not just playing with headlines, he's gambling with the credibility that makes deterrence and negotiation possible. Consider the way the transcript frames the domestic Israeli political reality. Polling suggesting a large portion of the public supports continuing military action and a prime minister boxed in by both coalition dynamics and public sentiment. That matters because ceasefires don't survive if political leaders can't sell them at home. If a ceasefire is seen as imposed, premature, or humiliating, it becomes politically toxic. Then leaders compensate with performative toughness, ambiguous commitments, or silent non-compliance. And if the ceasefire is only 10 days, the incentive to treat it as a tactical pause time to reposition, rearm, regroup is baked in unless there's robust verification and a credible path to something more durable. Now look at Lebanon's side of the equation in the transcript. Hezbollah's role, the weakness of the Lebanese army, the fear of tipping the country back toward internal conflict, and the necessity of international support for enforcement. That's not a side note. That's the core difficulty. You can't simply announce disarm Hezbollah as if it's a button on a dashboard. Disarmament is a political project, a security project, and a legitimacy project. It requires state capacity, consensus, and protection against retaliation. If the international community wants Lebanon to do hard things, it has to be prepared to do hard things too. Sustained aid, conditional support, monitoring frameworks, and a long-term strategy that doesn't evaporate when the cameras move on. But Trump's movement does not do sustained MAGA, does not do patient. The Republican Party that once claimed to care about peace through strength has become a party of strength through posting. They want the dopamine of the announcement, not the discipline of the follow-through. They want the banner headline, Trump achieves ceasefire, without accepting that if it collapses, the consequences are borne by civilians, soldiers, and regional stability, not by the guy who posted it. This is the moral rot of the Trump era. Accountability is always for someone else. The invitation to bring leaders to the White House for broader talks is presented as historic, potentially the most substantive engagement between Israel and Lebanon in decades, with normalization as an aspiration. If that happens in a serious way, it will require exactly what Trumpism undermines: careful preparation, trusted intermediaries, intelligence coordination, and a U.S. posture that's steady enough that both parties believe the commitments will survive the next tweet, the next cable segment, the next tantrum. The problem is that Trump's own record teaches foreign leaders the opposite lesson. He treats alliances as shakedowns, agreements as props, and institutions as enemies. He trained the world to expect that U.S. policy could swing wildly based on personal grievances. That training doesn't disappear because he posts ceasefire. And then there's the media trap embedded in all of this. Trump announces a major international development on his platform. Reporters rush to translate it into conventional governance language, and suddenly the storyline becomes Trump the deal maker again. That is how he launders legitimacy. It's not that journalists are malicious, it's that the attention economy rewards the big moment, and Trump is an attention engineer. The transcript even captures that gravitational pull. Major announcement, historic, breakthrough. Those words may or may not end up being true. But once they're said, the burden shifts. If it fails, the story becomes complex region, ancient hatreds, hard to sustain anything except the simplest explanation. A fragile ceasefire was marketed as a trophy, and trophies don't enforce themselves. A serious democratic critique doesn't root against peace. It insists on reality-based peace. It insists that peace is not a branding opportunity for a politician who repeatedly showed contempt for the rule of law, for alliances, for diplomatic expertise, and for the basic norms that keep governments from behaving like personal fiefdoms. It insists that if this ceasefire holds, the credit belongs to the people doing the unglamorous work, the negotiators, diplomats, security professionals, and regional actors making compromises under enormous pressure, more than to the guy who grabbed the megaphone. And if it doesn't hold, the consequences will illustrate exactly why governing by impulse and ego is not strength, it's negligence with a spotlight. So, yes, evaluate the ceasefire on its merits, hope for reduced violence, demand humanitarian access, Push for a credible mechanism to move from 10 days to durable security arrangements. But don't let MAGA sell you the fairy tale that a social media declaration is the same thing as an enforceable agreement. Trump didn't announce peace, he announced himself. The Republican Party will clap because clapping is their job now. The rest of us should keep our eyes on the terms, the verification, the enforcement, and the human stakes, because that's what real diplomacy looks like when it's not being staged as a reality show.